Good morning, Broncos country. Welcome into another episode of GMB. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. This is your daily insight, your morning cup of coffee to go along with all things Denver Broncos related. Here on the Mile High Sports YouTube page, please do us a favor, hit that subscribe button down below so we can continue to grow this for Colorado sports fans. Not only do we have Denver Broncos coverage, we have Arif Dean on the Colorado Avalanche. We have Drew Kreisman on the Colorado Rockies. We got our good friend Ryan Blackburn covering the Denver Nuggets. Mile High Sports. If you're a Colorado sports fan, this is the place to be. But let's go through a little bit of Aftermath Monday here as we break down the Broncos preseason loss week 2 against the San Francisco 49ers. So pull yourself a cup, try to keep up. Let's break it down. Let's dive into it. The Broncos preseason week 2 matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. We saw a little bit of action here from the Broncos starters. And when I mean a little bit, I mean mainly for Russell Wilson. We saw a little bit from him. We saw a lot more from everybody else with the first team unit on offense and on defense here specifically. But to open things up, obviously Denver loses 21-20 on a last-second field goal by Jake Moody of the 49ers. Not really dwelling about the end result of this preseason game here. And look, I think there are a lot of things that we'll address about, some concerns here and keeping things in perspective. The Broncos' third-team defense, they've struggled. They've struggled with pass rush. They've struggled with leverage in their drops at the linebacker position in the middle of the field. Cornerbacks are playing too far off. They're not breaking quick enough on deep routes. They have too many chunk plays, and that's what led to the 49ers winning this game. Had nothing to do with the Broncos' starters on offense or defense. So I think we got to put that into perspective here. We saw the return of Javonte Williams in Saturday's game against the 49ers. And look, obviously, the 49ers did not have Nick Bosa. They got that contract dispute going on, but the rest of the 49ers starters, they got some playing time against Russell Wilson, Javonte Williams, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy. And early on, I think the game plan from what we saw here from Sean Payton was just to get Javonte Williams as involved as possible in the sample size, because he was going to play a limited amount of snaps anyway. So, hey, limited amount of snaps. Let's get you as many touches as possible. And when we look at it, I mean, Javonte Williams, he had 3 rushes for 12 yards on the evening, but he got involved in the passing game. Russell Wilson got him involved, targeted him 5 times. He had 4 receptions overall in the game. I think he finished with around 18 yards. First play, Russ dumps a little jailbreak screen off to Javonte Williams. One of those moments, right? Your first game back, goes to look upfield, drops the screen, incomplete pass. But on the very next play, Russell Wilson drops back in the pocket. You get pressure, kind of trying to cave inside offensive line. I felt like did a really good job when those guys on the defensive line started shifting inside. They plugged them down, and Russell Wilson just dipped out, rolled out, and he threw it to Javonte for a 12-yard gain, first down. Welcome back, Javonte Williams, after tearing his ACL last season. It was good for him. Post-game report, he had said a lot of things, for him, he wanted to getting tackled out of the way. And look, he took a couple of shots. Fred Warner came up and hit him pretty hard there on a reception. But for the most part, I think for the Broncos' first-team offense, we saw a lot of good. We saw a much more improved performance from the offensive line. We saw a much more improved performance. I thought even last week, Russell Wilson did a pretty good job. This week, he did a really good job as well. What we also saw, Russ brought his legs back in this game, and we saw Sean Payton design some quarterback keepers there. There were a couple of plays where he scrambled because coverage was good. Protection, he was able to maneuver outside and run. There was this one play, though, on a designed quarterback keeper. He ran for 16 yards. Unfortunately, Cortland Sutton got called for a holding call, and penalties were an issue for the Broncos last night. They had 9 penalties for 74 yards, but a majority of those came from wide receivers. So you got to fix that. That's something Sean Payton's not going to be happy with. But overall, I think the first-team offense, you watch them if you're a Broncos fan, and a lot of comments that I did at Twitter Spaces at halftime. Broncos fans said just the first-team offense, it looked competent. They looked good doing the things that they just really couldn't do consistently enough last season. And I think that's important to put it into perspective. We're seeing this gradual growth here from the offense. And if you've been tuning in all throughout the week, the last 2 weeks, Russell Wilson and the offense have had pretty good practices against the Broncos defense. They've been able to move the ball. They've been able to get the quick passing game going. We saw a little bit more of the same here in this preseason game week 1. Now, obviously, the Broncos' first drive, it was a 13-play drive, 55 yards, ended in a Brett Maher field goal from 48 yards. He went 2 for 2 kicking on the evening. 2 for 2 on the extra points there. So really not a lot of concern. The kicking game in this game, that was a great sign to see from Brett Maher. Obviously, you could have made an argument. I mean, Russell Wilson was looking downfield for Jerry Jeudy, maybe overfloated it a little bit. Defender had a little bit of contact there. They didn't call it, so they settled for the field goal there. But the overall operation of the offense went smooth. 13 plays, you milked about 5 minutes, 55 seconds off the game clock there, which is great. And then you got a response. So now let's get to how did the Broncos first team defense look on their first series? Well, folks, it wasn't good at first because they allowed some chunk yardage, some underneath plays. You saw Brock Purdy getting some reps, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, no George Kittle, didn't see him in this game. So a lot of Kyle Juszczyk early on in that first series, but the 49ers have something good there with Brock Purdy and with Kyle Shanahan's offense. I mean, the way that he operates it, a lot of West Coast variances, setting up some outside looks. You fake it, you roll boot backside, dump off in the flat, or you take a shot downfield because you have different intermediate routes coming across the field that test different levels of coverage here for defenses. And that's what we saw a little bit early on. Now, granted, I must preface this by saying the Broncos defense came out in that first series. They were playing very vanilla. They were playing pretty much off. They didn't play a lot of tightness. They were playing about 7-8 yards off the ball, some outside leverage on some coverage concepts there. And it was really just forced, okay, hey, throw a short rally and make the tackle. Patrick Surtain, the starters played. It was Caden Stearns starting at safety alongside Kareem Jackson. You saw Jonathan Cooper and Randy Gregory starting. Everybody else was the same consistent guys we've seen across the board all throughout training camp in the preseason. So Surtain's first game back in terms of preseason action after not playing last week against the Arizona Cardinals. And look, Deebo had a couple of big plays. I think he had 2 catches for something along the lines. Let's take a look here. He had 2 catches for 39 yards, and one of his catches was a catch and run of 25 yards because he's just so explosive. They got the ball to him in short space, caught it, ran upfield. He did a lot of damage there. But the 49ers offense, they drove down to the 1-yard line. Brandon Ayuk called in a catch downfield. But then the Broncos defense really tightened up in the red zone, right? And the red zone defense for them has been pretty solid throughout the last few seasons. They've had a very good unit. Jonathan Cooper came up big with a sack on Brock Purdy to back him up a little bit, and they were able to force the 49ers to settle for a field goal. And then obviously the offense came on. They matched it up 3-3 there. Second defensive series here for the Broncos. Once again, it was a quick 3 and out. And look, Damari Mathis looked impressive. He had a tremendous pass breakup. When we talk about technique, I mean, he was being challenged vertically. The wide receiver throttled and stopped. Damari did a great job moving his feet, getting his hips in line, getting in phase on the receiver's hip, bringing his ball side hand forward and knocking it down incomplete. I mean, textbook technician play right there. Love to see that from him because that's a very similar play to what Patrick Surtain had against Devontae Adams last year when they took on the Raiders in Las Vegas. So I liked what I saw from those two guys. You take a look at maybe some other stuff as well. Damari Mathis ripped the ball out. Unfortunately, the Broncos couldn't recover it. So, hey, it's a good sign. You got your DBs coming up being aggressive. You know, I had a chance to talk with Damari Mathis throughout training camp. I had a one-on-one with him about 2 weeks ago. And just for him, he's not afraid to be physical. He's not afraid to get his nose dirty, getting in the piles, making contact on running backs, receivers. He's a big believer in that. And I thought he played with really good technique in this game on Saturday against the 49ers. Surtain was yanked, I think, after the first series. You don't want to – you already know what you're going to get with those guys, you know. And granted, you're going to get a little bit of a challenge from the 49ers. It's good to be able to have that type of rep. But at the end of the day, it's not worth losing some of your key guys in a preseason game. But some other guys, Sean Payton felt like clearly needed some more snaps, some more reps. He wants to see a little bit more of. We saw Randy Gregory play a little bit into the fourth quarter. I didn't think Frank Clark was playing at first here for the Broncos in this specific game because it was Jonathan Cooper and Randy Gregory getting the start. And I was like, all right, well, you know, hey, Frank Clark's maybe still getting into football shape. No, he ended up playing later on in the second quarter, mainly the third quarter. And I was a little bit surprised there. Now, his post-game comments, they read a little interesting because he was asked, you know, when was the last time you played this late into a fourth quarter in a preseason game? He says, I don't know. And he talked about, he's like, you're going to have to ask the coaches about that. I'm hoping this doesn't become an issue because Frank Clark can contribute. Now, maybe here's my take on it. I feel like Jonathan Cooper should be the starter at outside linebacker. I mean, there's not even a question about it. I think anybody watching the game will probably agree with me. If you agree with me, hey, let us know in the comment section down below. But I feel like Jonathan Cooper just provides the Broncos with this motor and consistency at edge rusher they just simply don't have with anybody else. And look, Jonathan Cooper had the one sack against Brock Purdy, but he had another play where he just came screaming off the right side, and Sam Darnold almost saw a ghost for a minute. We're bringing back an old analogy there. Sam Darnold saw a ghost. Jonathan Cooper's pressure forced him to spin directly into Randy Gregory and Josie Jewell, who came up and cleaned things up there. Jonathan Cooper is a difference maker, and I honestly think that he'll be a starter here. Look, Frank Clark, a veteran guy, obviously Super Bowl champion. He's got the resume, but is he the best option right now for the Broncos in terms of starting on defense, or is he maybe better suited at this point of his career coming in as a rotational role alongside Nick Bonito in certain packages? I don't think it hurts, to be honest with you. And look, he signed a one-year deal. You don't have as much equity in that as you do with a guy like Jonathan Cooper, who could, as I've said on this program before, Jonathan Cooper could be a rising star here in the NFL at the edge rusher position. The Broncos have a gem on their hands who went in the 7th round because of a heart condition, but this is a guy who just is so consistent from a technique standpoint. He is so good, so disciplined, and when there's a run play going away from him, he does such a great job of cutting back hill line depth and playing it in case the running back decides to cut and come back inside. He'd be there for the backside track down. There's times where he's even gotten there from the backside track down. So for me, Jonathan Cooper has more allure, in my opinion, to start opposite of Randy Gregory. I think he gives them the best chance to win defensively, to be an impact player on the defensive side of the ball, because you need to get pressure on opposing quarterbacks. You know, the idea of this defense, even with Ejiro Evero, look, they're going to send pressure, but it's also about, hey, you're playing some off coverage. There's going to be times where they play some press, but you're playing some off coverage mainly so that pressure gets there. It allows your cornerbacks to see what's in front of them, break on a ball, make a play, especially with a flustered pocket or maybe a rush throw by a QB. That's how you're designed to get a little bit more of these takeaways here in the NFL. Now, there's some things they obviously have to clean up in terms of consistency, in terms of tackling, maybe getting off some blocks on the defensive line. But for the most part, I felt like the Broncos' overall operation, first-team offense, first-team defense, thought it did a pretty good job overall. So, yeah, you come away with the takeaway that it's unfortunate that the Broncos lost this game. Sean Payton, look, wins and losses, in my opinion, the scoreboard doesn't necessarily matter in the preseason, but Sean Payton values winning because he feels like it's important for building chemistry, right? And obviously Denver's 0-2 here in the preseason. Doesn't have any indication on how they're going to do in the regular season. But for Sean Payton, the thing that he wants them to do is to learn how to win again, right? And unfortunately, the third-team defense, these are a lot of guys that aren't even going to be on the active roster. A lot of these players are going to be practice squad players, or they're not even going to be on the roster come week 1 against the Las Vegas Raiders. And so you wanted to see a little bit more of these young guys. And I think that's a little bit of a disappointment. But Sean Payton came out in his post-game press conference and said that overall, despite the result, he felt much better about the team and what they did and the things that they adjusted well on that they didn't do well in the first week of the preseason. He's got some comfort in that, and I think that's a good thing to build off of. But, yeah, the Broncos ultimately are going to have to win. Folks, preseason is not going to determine whether they're going to win in the regular season or whether they're going to lose. They went 2-1 in the preseason last year. We all saw how that fell out in the regular season. So all those things kind of put into perspective here. There's some things you're going to build off. Joint training camp practices coming up this week against the Rams. Final preseason game, more than likely. Not going to see a single starter play in that game, rightfully so. Going to see a lot of our old friend Brett Rippon for the Rams. And maybe Brett Rippon is a guy that they still had on the roster. We'll see. But overall, the one player I think we need to acknowledge here, a couple guys we'll give shout-outs to before we close out this morning's episode of Good Morning Broncos. Jaleel McLaughlin, folks, once again, a guy who's doing a little bit of everything here, and not only on the rushing side of things, the receiving side of things, but the return side of things. In the kick return game, he had a 46-yard kick return that gave the Broncos some momentum. The very next play, Tony Jones Jr. breaks off a run to the right side for 43 yards, and then Jaleel McLaughlin comes in and cleans it up and gets a rushing touchdown there. Or a receiving touchdown there. You love to see that there, right? So for Jaleel, he finished the game with 2 total touchdowns, 1 receiving, 1 rushing. And obviously he had a kick return early on in the game. They pooch punted it pretty high in the air, and it forced him to run up about maybe 15 to 20 yards to go get it. It bounced, fumbled it. Luckily, he recovered it, though. So that's just one of those things. He's a young guy. You're going to continue to coach him up. Ideally, you want maybe one of your other up men at that point to return it and maybe even fair catch it at that point, because you can fair catch it. It's just one of those things you're going to have to learn from. Jaleel looks unbelievably talented. And look, obviously, Tony Jones Jr. had a big run on the evening. But when we talk about running back 3, when you look at Jaleel McLaughlin, you look at Tony Jones Jr., man, Jaleel's just way more explosive. I mean, putting it into perspective, if Jaleel McLaughlin had that carry that Tony Jones Jr. had to the right side, he's gone for a touchdown. No one's catching him. The defense caught up with Tony Jones Jr. He's not as explosive, but it was a good hard run by him. I have to give him credit for that. And with Tyler Beatty's injury and him missing this week, not sure if he's going to miss this upcoming week against the Rams. In my opinion, Jaleel McLaughlin showed too much that you cannot try to sneak him through waivers. Another team I feel like will pick him up, and I don't think you can risk that at that point. I feel like if you really want Tyler Beatty on this roster, you can risk getting him through waivers because, look, hey, he only played one preseason game, didn't play this preseason game, has one more game left. Not sure if he's going to return to the mix here. Not sure what's going on with that. Have to keep an eye on that there overall. But overall, Jaleel McLaughlin, in my opinion, running back 3, I think he's kind of solidified that notion there here for the Broncos. Some unfortunate injury news. Jalen Virgil suffered a knee injury on one of the final plays of the first half there. Did a tremendous job, ran a beautiful route, caught it downfield for 50 yards before being tackled at the 1-yard line. Kind of got rolled up on, and it's a knee injury. At first, I thought watching the replay was like an ankle, but it seemed like with the force that he planted his foot in the ground, the force of the defender landing on his leg there, his knee kind of caved inward. He's going to undergo an MRI, and we're hopeful that the results aren't serious there because it was a tremendous play for Jalen Virgil. And you have a real legitimate argument. And Sean Payton ripped this in his post-game press conference that they should have had 1 second left on the clock there. And not to mention you had an injured player who at this point, we don't know what it is, but if he misses time or misses the season, like there's a valid gripe that Sean Payton has about the officiating. And he didn't hold back from it in his post-game press conference. So just unfortunate, hoping that Jalen Virgil is okay. I mean, he's made some plays here in camp. He's had a very under-the-radar type of camp. And now I think that the Broncos wide receiver depth is a little bit questionable right now. And it's something we'll discuss on tomorrow's episode of GMB. But the Los Angeles Rams are coming to town for joint training camp practices with the Broncos. No Aaron Donald, apparently, as it was reported. He's going to stay in LA. His wife and him are expecting a child any day now. So he's going to be there for the birth of his child. More likely will not participate in joint practices and will not play in Saturday's game against the Broncos. But hey, look, the Broncos' first home preseason game coming up here. Fans will get an opportunity to see the brand new renovations of over $100 million invested in the stadium, a new scoreboard, new signage, and new experiences all around Empower Field at Mile High. Broncos country, thanks for having your morning cup of coffee with me as we recap week 2 of the NFL preseason. Broncos lose 21-20 to the San Francisco 49ers. Offense looks better. Good things in store here. We're ready for the regular season. Thank you so much for tuning in to GMB. We'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.